The transport ship docked at Station Orion 7 with a deep rumble that shook the metal floors. Inside, 43 recruits waited in their seats. Most of them were aliens. There were tall reptilian with green scales and yellow eyes. There were thin, pale who could read minds. They were made of living crystal that glowed soft blue. And among all these strange creatures, there were only 4 humans. One of them was a woman named. She sat in the back corner of the transport. Her black hair was cut short, her face showed nothing. No fear, no excitement, no curiosity. She simply sat there with her hands folded on her lap looking straight ahead at the wall. The other recruits talked loudly around her. They laughed. They complained. They boasted about their skills, but said nothing. The doors opened and bright white light poured into the transport. A voice commanded them to exit in single file. The recruits obeyed, walking out into a massive hangar bay that could hold 100 ships, walked with them, her footsteps silent on the metal floor. Waiting for them was a row of instructors. Most were aliens, but standing at the center was a human man with gray in his hair and scars on his face. His name was, and he was the first human to ever become a senior instructor at the Galactic Coalition Military Academy. He had fought in 12 wars. He had killed more enemies than he could count, and he had seen every type of soldier the galaxy could produce. But when his eyes passed over, something made him stop. She stood perfectly still in the line of recruits. Her breathing was slow and even. Her eyes were open but somehow empty, like windows into a dark room. Had seen that look before. He had seen it in soldiers who had witnessed terrible things. He had seen it in prisoners who had given up on life. But he had never seen it in a new recruit on their first day. He checked his for her file. It was almost empty. No combat history, no family listed, no school records, just a short note that said she had been transferred from something called the Earth Sector Rehabilitation Division. Did not know what that meant, and that bothered him. The orientation began. The head instructor, a massive named, explained the rules of the academy. Training would last 1 year. Those who passed would join the Coalition Defense Forces. Those who failed would be sent home in shame. Those who died would be forgotten. Then came the introductions. Each recruit had to step forward, say their name, and tell everyone why they wanted to join. The recruits spoke with pride about honor and glory. They spoke softly about protecting their telepathic colonies. They hummed in their strange crystal voices about duty to the light. The 3 other humans talked about adventure, money, and proving that their species belonged among the stars. Then it was turn. She stepped forward. Every eye in the hangar turned to her. She stood there for a moment completely still. The silence stretched on, made an impatient noise. Then simply bowed her head once and walked back to her place in line. She did not speak. Laughter erupted from the recruits. One of them called out in a mocking voice that humans were the mute prey species of the galaxy. Others joined in, making cruel jokes about how she must have forgotten how to use her tongue. Even some of the other humans looked embarrassed, but did not react. She did not blush. She did not clench her fists. She did not even blink. She simply stood there with that same empty expression, as if she could not hear them at all. Watch this carefully. Most recruits would have shown some emotion, anger, shame, defiance, something, but showed nothing. It was not the calmness of a confident soldier. It was something else, something that made the hairs on his neck stand up. After orientation, the recruits were sent to their quarters, walked alone through the long metal corridors. Other recruits moved in groups, talking and laughing, already forming friendships. But no one walked with, no one even looked at her. She was like a ghost passing through the crowd. Her room was small, a bed, a desk, a locker, and a tiny bathroom. She entered and closed the door behind her. Then she stood in the center of the room without moving. 10 minutes passed, 20, 30. She did not sit down. She did not unpack her bag. She simply stood there, staring at the wall, breathing slowly. If anyone had been watching her, they would have thought something was very wrong. That night, sat in his office and wrote his first report about her. His fingers moved slowly across the keyboard as he chose his words carefully. He wrote that her behavior was unusual. He wrote that her file was incomplete. He wrote that something about her did not match any psychological profile he had ever studied. At the end of the report, he added a request. He wanted enhanced monitoring on human recruit 7. He wanted cameras in her training areas. He wanted her biometric data tracked at all times. He wanted to know everything about her. He sent the report to the Academy overseers and leaned back in his chair. Through his window, he could see the stars stretching out into infinity. Somewhere out there, wars were being fought. Species were dying. The galaxy was burning. And here on this station, a silent woman had arrived with no past and no voice. Had trained thousands of soldiers in his career. He had learned to read people like books. He could look at a recruit and know within minutes if they would become a hero or a corpse. But when he thought about, he felt something he had not felt in many years. He felt uncertain. And for a man uncertainty was the most dangerous feeling in the universe. In her dark room on the other side of the station, finally moved. She walked to the small window and looked out at the same stars was watching. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. A face with no expression, eyes with no light. She had been taught that words were weakness. She had been taught that connection was a trap. She had been taught that the only way to survive was to be invisible. So she would be invisible, she would be silent, she would be nothing. And maybe, if she was lucky, no one would ever discover what she really was. 3 months passed at the academy. Seasons meant nothing in space, but the recruits felt time moving anyway. They grew stronger. They learned new skills. They made friends and enemies. They changed. But did not change. She still did not speak, not a single word in 90 days. She followed every order. She completed every exercise. She ate alone in the corner of the dining hall. She slept alone in her small room. She existed like a shadow, always present but never noticed. Her test scores were perfectly average, not good enough to attract attention, not bad enough to cause concern. She ran at medium speed. She shot with medium accuracy. She fought with medium skill. Everything about her was medium. Everything about her was forgettable. But some people were paid to notice what others forgot. Was a human intelligence analyst who worked in a dark room filled with screens. Her job was to watch the recruits and look for problems. Spies, traitors, mentally unstable soldiers. She had done this job for 7 years and she was very good at it. File had been on her desk since day one. At first, thought she was just a shy woman with social problems. The galaxy was full of such people, but as the weeks passed, began to notice things that did not make sense. His heart rate was strange. Normal people had heart rates that went up and down depending on what they were doing. Running made it faster, resting made it slower, fear made it race. But's heart beat at exactly 60 times per minute, always, no matter what. During combat drills, her heart stayed at 60. During survival tests in high gravity that made other recruits vomit, her heart stayed at 60. During a sparring match when the instructor hit her so hard she flew across the room, her heart stayed at 60. Played that sparring video many times. She watched hit the wall. She watched her slide to the floor. She watched her stand back up with blood running from her nose. And through all of it, her heart never beat faster than 60 times per minute. That was not normal. That was not human. Began to watch more closely. She reviewed every minute of footage from every camera in the station. Most of it was boring. Walking to class, sitting in the dining hall, lying in her bed with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling for hours without moving. Then, on a quiet night in the 3rd month, found something. The timestamp said 300 hours, the middle of the night. The training hall was supposed to be empty, but the motion sensors had detected movement and the cameras had recorded everything. Leaned forward in her chair and watched. entered the dark training hall alone. She stood in the center of the empty room for exactly 30 seconds. Then she began to move. His breath caught in her throat. This was not the average recruit she had been watching for 3 months. This was something else entirely. Flowed through combat forms like water. Her body bent and twisted in ways that should have been impossible for human bones. She moved so fast that the camera could barely track her. Holographic training dummies activated around her. They were set to the highest difficulty level. Had never seen any recruit fight at that level. Most instructors could not fight at that level. Destroyed them all in 47 seconds. She used no weapons, just her hands and feet and elbows and knees. Every strike was perfect. Every movement was precise. She did not waste a single motion. When the last hologram flickered and died, stood in the center of the room without even breathing hard. Then she did something that scared more than the fighting. She stood completely still for exactly 4 minutes, not moving, not stretching, not doing anything, just standing there like a machine that had been switched off. Then, at exactly 3:08 hours, she turned and walked out of the training hall. She returned to her quarters and went to sleep. His hands were shaking. She played the video again, and again, and again. Each time she noticed new details, the angle of strikes, the efficiency of her footwork, the complete absence of emotion on her face as she killed hologram after hologram. This woman had been hiding. She had been pretending to be average. She had been lying to everyone for 3 months. And if had not been watching the cameras at 3 in the morning, no one would ever have known. Opens file and stared at the threat classification. It said observation required. That was the lowest level. It was the classification they gave to recruits who were probably fine but needed a little extra attention. Deleted that classification. She typed new words with trembling fingers. Galaxy-class threat. Containment protocols recommended. It was the highest classification the Academy had. It was reserved for beings who could destroy ships, kill armies, threaten planets. In the entire history of the Academy, fewer than 20 individuals had ever received that classification. Added one more note to the file. This one was for the senior instructor who had requested the enhanced monitoring. She wrote that his instincts had been correct. She wrote that was not what she appeared to be. She wrote that they were dealing with something very dangerous. Then she sent the file and sat back in her chair. Through the walls of her dark office, she could feel the station humming around her. Thousands of recruits and instructors and staff, all sleeping peacefully in their beds. None of them knew that a monster was walking among them, wearing the face of a quiet young woman. In his quarters on the other side of the station, buzzed with the incoming report. He read it twice. Then he read it a third time. Containment protocols recommended. That meant armed guards, locked doors, neural suppressors. It meant treating like a weapon instead of a person. Thought about this for a long time. He thought about the empty look in her eyes. He thought about the blood on her face after hit her. He thought about the way she had bowed instead of speaking on her first day. Then he did something he had never done before in his career. He rejected the containment order. He wrote a single line in response to his report. He wrote that he wanted to continue observation only. He wrote that he wanted to see what would do next. It was a risk. If hurt someone would be responsible, his career would end, he might even go to prison. But was old, and he had learned that the most interesting things in the galaxy were also the most dangerous. He wanted to know what was. He wanted to know why she was hiding. He wanted to know what would happen if something pushed her hard enough to stop hiding. Somewhere deep in the station, slept in her small bed with her eyes closed. She did not dream. She had been trained not to dream. Dreams were weakness. Dreams were noise. Dreams were human. And whatever had become, she was not sure she was human anymore. The Crucible was the Academy's most famous test. Every year, recruits were dropped onto a hostile moon and told to survive for 7 days. They had to find food. They had to fight enemies. They had to complete missions that pushed them to their absolute limits. Many recruits failed. Some recruits died. Those who survived earned the respect of the entire galaxy. His team was announced 1 week before the drop. She would be working with 4 others. 2 of them were aliens. Was a thin and pale with large black eyes that could see into minds. Was a creature of living crystal whose body glowed with soft blue light. The other 2 were humans. Was a loud, aggressive man who loved to fight and hated to lose. Was a medic with a kind smile who had tried many times to become his friend. Had ignored all of his attempts at friendship. She did not answer questions. She did not return smiles. She simply looked away and walked in another direction, but never stopped trying. She was stubborn that way. The transport dropped them on the dark side of a moon called Void 7. The surface was covered with gray dust and black rocks. The sky was filled with stars but no sun. The temperature was cold enough to kill an unprotected human in minutes. His team moved quickly to find shelter, took the lead, shouting orders and pushing forward, used his telepathy to scan for enemies. His crystal body provided light in the darkness, stayed close to, even though never acknowledged her presence. For 2 days, everything went according to plan. They found a cave system to sleep in. They completed their first mission objectives. They worked together as a team, even if never spoke or showed any emotion. Then on the 3rd day, everything changed. They were crossing a wide canyon when the attack came. Energy beams cut through the darkness. Explosions rocked the ground, screamed for everyone to take cover. At first, they thought it was part of the test. The Academy often sent fake enemies to attack recruit teams, but then checked the communication channels and his crystal body flickered with fear. These were not fake enemies. These were real pirates. The message came through on emergency frequency. A rogue faction called the Blood Reavers had invaded the moon to steal Coalition supply caches. They did not care about the recruits. They did not care about the test. They were here for money, and they would kill anyone in their way. 2 other recruit teams had already been massacred. Their distress signals had gone silent. The Academy was sending rescue ships, but they were hours away. His team was alone. The pirates cornered them at the end of the canyon. There was no way out. Behind them was a wall of solid rock. In front of them were 14 armed soldiers in black armor, carrying weapons that could cut through steel. Raised his training rifle with shaking hands. It was a low-power weapon, meant for practice, not real combat. Against the pirates' military-grade armor, it was almost useless. Tried to use his telepathy to confuse the pirates, but their helmets blocked his mental waves. Prepared to fight, but his crystal body was designed for engineering, not combat. Clutched her medical kit and prayed to gods she had never believed in. The lead pirate stepped forward. He was a huge man with scars on his face and death in his eyes. He looked at the recruits like they were insects. He raised his weapon to fire, and then moved. No one saw her start. One moment she was standing at the back of the group. The next moment she was in front of the lead pirate, her hand wrapped around his throat. She crushed his windpipe before he could scream. Then she took his weapon and became a blur of death. His optical implants recorded everything, but even his advanced technology could barely follow what happened. Moved through the pirates like a ghost made of violence. She shot 2 in the head before they could react. She broke the neck of a 3rd with her bare hands. She kicked a 4th so hard that his armor shattered and his ribs collapsed into his lungs. The pirates tried to fight back. They fired their weapons at her, but she was never where they aimed. She flowed between their shots like water flowing between rocks. She used their own bodies as shields. She turned their own weapons against them. In 11 seconds, 14 armed pirates were dead. Stood among the corpses, still holding the leader's weapon. Her face was spotted with blood that was not her own. Her breathing was slow and even. Her heart rate was exactly 60 beats per minute. She turned back to her team. They stared at her with wide eyes. His mouth was open, but no words came out. Had retreated into his own mind, overwhelmed by the psychic echo of so much sudden death. His crystal body had gone dark with shock. Only managed to speak. Her voice was a tiny whisper in the cold darkness. "What are you?" Looked at her. For a single moment, something flickered in those empty eyes. It might have been confusion. It might have been pain. It might have been nothing at all. Then tilted her head slightly toward the canyon exit. It was the first time anyone had ever seen her express anything. Just a tiny movement. A small gesture that said more than words ever could. "Follow me, we are not safe here. Move." They followed her. They walked through the canyon in terrified silence. Led the way, her eyes scanning every shadow, her body ready to explode into violence at any moment. Behind her, the others struggled to understand what they had just witnessed. Had always believed he was the strongest fighter on the team. He had trained for years. He had won dozens of sparring matches. He had thought he was ready for anything. Now he knew the truth. He was nothing. He was a child playing with toys, and the silent woman walking in front of him was something beyond his comprehension. They reached the extraction point 3 hours later. Coalition rescue ships were waiting for them. Medics rushed forward to check their injuries. Officers demanded to know what had happened. Said nothing. She simply stood apart from the others, staring at the stars, waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. Handed over his optical recording to the senior officers. They watched it once. Their faces went pale. They watched it again. One of them had to sit down. Then they looked at, and she saw the fear in their eyes. She had been taught that fear was power. She had been taught that being feared meant being safe. But in that moment, standing under the cold stars of an alien moon did not feel powerful. She felt very, very alone. After the crucible, they put in a room with white walls and no windows. They told her it was for her own protection. They told her they just needed to ask some questions. They told her everything would be fine. Knew they were lying. She had been trained to recognize lies. She had been trained to expect betrayal. She sat in the white room for 3 days, eating the food they brought her, sleeping when her body demanded it, waiting for whatever came next. In a conference room far above her, the academy overseers argued about what to do with her. Some wanted to arrest her as a threat to coalition security. Some wanted to study her like a laboratory animal. Some wanted to execute her quietly and pretend she had never existed. They shouted at each other for hours, unable to agree on anything. Then requested permission to access her sealed Earth records. The overseers went silent. Sealed records required the highest level of clearance. Sealed records contained secrets that governments would kill to protect. Opening sealed records was not done lightly, but was persuasive. He reminded them that had saved 4 coalition recruits. He reminded them that she had eliminated a serious threat with no friendly casualties. He reminded them that understanding her was better than fearing her. After 6 hours of debate, they granted his request. Sat alone in his office with the files. They were thick and heavy, filled with documents that had been classified for decades. He began to read, and as he read, his hands began to shake. Had been born in a place called Laboratory 9. It was a human black site, hidden deep beneath the mountains of old Earth, funded by a government that no longer existed. The laboratory had one purpose. It was called Project Silence. The goal of Project Silence was simple: create the perfect human weapon. They had taken children. Some were orphans. Some were stolen. Some were bought from desperate parents who needed money more than they needed their bobbies. The scientists did not care where the children came from. They only cared about what the children could become. Was Subject 7. She had arrived at the laboratory when she was 3 years old. She had no memory of anything before that. The laboratory was the only home she had ever known. For 18 years they trained her. They tortured her. They broke her body and rebuilt it stronger. They broke her mind and rebuilt it emptier. They used drugs and surgery and psychological conditioning that would have been called crimes against humanity if anyone had known about them. Speaking was forbidden. Subjects who spoke were punished with pain. After enough pain, the subjects learned to stay silent. Some of them forgot how to speak at all. Emotions were forbidden. Subjects who showed emotion were punished with isolation. They were locked in dark rooms for weeks at a time, alone with nothing but their own thoughts. After enough isolation, the subjects learned to feel nothing. Connection was forbidden. Subjects who formed attachments to each other were punished with death, not their own death. They were forced to watch as their friends were killed in front of them. After enough deaths, the subjects learned to never care about anyone. By the time was 21, she was no longer human in any normal sense. She was a weapon that walked and breathed and waited for orders. She could kill in 100 different ways. She could survive conditions that would destroy normal soldiers. She could turn off her fear like turning off a light. But she could not speak, she could not feel, she could not connect. The project was never completed. When Earth's government collapsed during the Unification Wars, Laboratory 9 was destroyed. The scientists were killed in the fighting. The records were scattered and lost. Of the 19 subjects who had survived the training, only 3 escaped the destruction. Most of them were hunted down and killed by various factions who feared what they could do. They were too dangerous to be allowed to live. They were monsters, and monsters had to be destroyed. Should have died with them, but something strange happened. A man found her. His name was Minyu. He was a rehabilitation officer assigned to deal with survivors of the old government's secret programs. He found hiding in the ruins of a burned city, starving and broken and waiting for someone to kill her. He did not kill her. Instead, he took her to a small house on the edge of a quiet town. He gave her food and water and a bed to sleep in. He did not ask her to speak. He did not ask her to explain herself. He simply sat with her, day after day, week after week, month after month. For 4 years, Minyu worked to undo what Laboratory 9 had done. He taught that she was allowed to exist. He taught her that not everyone wanted to hurt her. He taught her that the world was not only made of pain and obedience and death. She never fully recovered her voice. The damage was too deep, but she learned to write. She learned to nod and shake her head. She learned to make small gestures that communicated simple ideas. It was not much, but it was something. One day, Minyu told her something that changed everything. He said that she had a choice now. She could hide for the rest of her life, or she could try to become something new. She could let her past define her, or she could build a different future. Then he said 7 words that had never heard before, not once in her entire existence. You can choose who you want to protect. She thought about those words for a long time. She thought about the children who had died beside her in the laboratory. She thought about the scientists who had created her. She thought about the wars that had destroyed everything she knew. Then she decided to join the Coalition Military Academy. Not because she was ordered to, not because she wanted to kill, but because she wanted to try something different. She wanted to see if a weapon could become a person. She wanted to find out if protection felt different from destruction. Closed the files and sat in silence. Outside his window, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere in the station was waiting in her white room, expecting pain or death or another cage. He understood now why she scored average on every test. She was hiding. She was trying to be invisible. She was doing the only thing she knew how to do. Survive. Made a decision. He requested a private meeting with. He wanted to talk to her, not as an instructor to a recruit, not as a threat assessment officer to a dangerous subject, but as one human to another. The request was approved. He walked to the white room and entered alone. Sat in the corner, her back against the wall, her eyes tracking him like a predator watching prey. Sat down across from her. He did not bring guards. He did not bring weapons. He simply sat there and looked at her with old, tired eyes that had seen too much death. "I read your file," he said quietly, "all of it." Did not react. Her face remained empty. Her body remained still. Leaned forward. "I know what they did to you. I know what you are, and I want you to know something." He paused. "You are not in a laboratory anymore. You are not a subject. You are not a weapon." He reached out and placed something on the floor between them. It was a simple thing, a piece of paper and a pen. "If you want to tell me anything," he said, "you can write it down, but only if you want to, only if you choose to." For a long moment, nothing happened. Stared at the paper like it was a trap. She had been given tests like this before. She had been punished for every wrong answer. Then slowly, she reached out and took the pen. She wrote 2 words and pushed the paper back to. He read them, and for the first time in many years, he felt his eyes grow wet. The paper said, "Thank you." It was not much, just 2 words, but for it was everything. It was the first real communication she had chosen to make in over a decade. Nodded once. "You're welcome," he said. "Now let's figure out what happens next." 1 month after the Crucible returned to training, the overseers had decided not to contain her. Instead, they gave her a special classification. She would be allowed to continue as a recruit, but she would be watched carefully. Every moment of every day, cameras and sensors would track her movements. Did not mind being watched. She was used to it. What surprised her was how the other recruits treated her now. Before the Crucible, they had ignored her. Now they feared her. They moved out of her way in the corridors. They lowered their voices when she entered a room. They looked at her with wide eyes and whispered to each other when they thought she could not hear. Only 2 people treated her the same as before, continued to train her without special treatment, and continued to sit next to her at meals, chattering about nothing, pretending that everything was normal. Did not understand why stayed. She had seen what could do. She had watched her kill 14 people in 11 seconds, but instead of running away, moved closer. One day wrote a note and passed it to. It said, "Why?" Read it and smiled. "Why what?" Gestured at herself and then at the empty seats around them. Everyone else had moved away. Everyone else was afraid, but remained. "Oh," said, "you want to know why I'm still here?" She thought about it for a moment. "Because everyone deserves a friend, even scary people, maybe especially scary people." Did not respond, but she did not move away either. Weeks passed. The training continued. Remained silent, but small things began to change. She nodded at in the mornings. She waited for when he fell behind during runs. She helped carry heavy equipment without being asked. They were tiny gestures, almost invisible, but noticed them, and he began to hope that maybe, just maybe, was becoming something more than a weapon. Then the Hollow arrived. The emergency sirens woke everyone at midnight. Red lights flashed in every corridor. A voice on the speakers announced that the station was under attack. All recruits were ordered to report to the central bunker immediately. But there was no time to reach the bunker. The Hollow were a species no one had ever seen before. They came from beyond the edge of known space, with ships that moved faster than anything the Coalition had ever built. Their bodies were covered in black shells like insects. Their faces had no features except for mouths filled with sharp teeth. When they spoke, it sounded like static and screaming mixed together. They did not negotiate. They did not explain. They simply attacked. 3 border worlds fell in a single day. Entire populations were slaughtered. Coalition defense fleets were destroyed in minutes. And now, a Hollow strike force had reached Station Orion 7 before any rescue ships could arrive. The station shook as enemy weapons hit the outer hull. Explosions echoed through the corridors. The lights flickered and died. replaced by dim emergency lamps that cast everything in bloody red. Gathered the combat-ready recruits in the main hall. There were not many. Most of the recruits were too young, too scared, too unprepared for real war, but those who could fight formed a line and waited for orders. Looked for, but she was not there. She had already left. Deep in the station, hollow boarding parties had cut through the outer walls. They poured into the corridors like a flood of black death. Their weapons fired beams of burning light that melted metal and flesh alike. Their claws tore through anything they touched. Moved toward them through the dark corridors. Her footsteps made no sound. Her breathing was slow and calm. Her heart beat at exactly 60 times per minute. Behind her, she heard running footsteps. She turned to see and chasing after her. "Don't go alone," gasped, "please." "We saw you leave," said. His voice was shaking, but his eyes were determined. "We're coming with you." Looked at them. They were not warriors. They were not weapons. They were just two young humans who were probably going to die. She should have told them to go back. She should have pushed them away. Attachment was dangerous. Caring about people got them killed. But something had changed something small and new and fragile, something that felt almost like warmth. She nodded once and turned back toward the enemy. They found the hollow at the end of a long corridor. There were dozens of them, maybe 100. Their black bodies filled the passage from wall to wall. Their static screams echoed through the metal halls. Stopped, she turned to, and they stood behind her, weapons ready, terror in their eyes. And then, for the first time in her life, spoke. Her voice was rough and broken. It scraped out of her throat like a blade dragging across stone. It was barely louder than a whisper. But it was a voice, her voice. "Stay behind me," she said. His eyes filled with tears. His mouth fell open in shock. Then turned toward the hollow, and she stopped being human. The battle lasted 12 minutes. To end, it felt like 12 hours. They fought beside as best they could, firing their weapons at the black shapes in the darkness. But mostly they just watched. They watched dance through the hollow like a ghost made of death. They watched her tear through their shells with her bare hands. They watched her move so fast that she seemed to be in multiple places at once. They watched her kill and kill and kill until the corridor was painted with alien blood. The hollow tried to stop her. They fired their weapons. They swarmed her with claws and teeth. They screamed their static screams that drove other soldiers mad. But did not stop. She could not stop. She was everything that Laboratory 9 had made her, but now she had something else. Now she had something to protect. When the last hollow fell, silence filled the corridor. Stood in the center of the carnage, blood dripping from her hands. Her uniform was torn. Her skin was cut in a dozen places, but she was still standing. Ran to her and threw her arms around her. Went stiff with surprise. No one had hugged her since Minu. She did not know what to do. "You spoke," whispered. "You actually spoke." Stood there in the hug, confused and uncertain. Then slowly, she raised one hand and patted on the back. It was awkward and strange and completely wrong. It was also the most human thing she had ever done. Coalition reinforcements arrived 2 hours later. They found the station damaged but intact. They found the hollow boarding parties eliminated. They found a single woman standing in a corridor full of alien corpses, surrounded by survivors who looked at her with something beyond fear. It looked like awe. The overseers reviewed the footage. They updated its file one final time. They gave her a new classification that had never been given before. Human Galaxy-class threat. Status Coalition asset. Do not engage, do not contain, do not betray. 6 months later stood in front of a new class of recruits. She had been promoted to assistant instructor. Stood beside her, proud and calm. Watched from the doorway, smiling. The recruits stared at with wide eyes. They had all heard the stories. They knew what she could do. A young human recruit raised his trembling hand. "Ma'am, is it true you never talked during training?" looked at him. Her face was still quiet. Her eyes were still calm, but something was different now. Something was softer. "I did not know what to say," she replied. Her voice was still rough. "It probably always would be. Now I do." The recruit swallowed. "What do you say, ma'am?" Looked at, she looked at. She looked at all the young faces waiting for her answer. For the first time in her life, she smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was real. "I say welcome to the academy," she said. "Let us see what you become." Outside the windows, the stars burned eternal and bright. The galaxy was vast and dangerous and full of enemies who wanted humanity dead. But humanity had now, and had finally found something worth more than silence. She had found her voice. She had found her purpose. She had found a family.